let me introduce the panel. Arun Venkataraman is the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Global Markets and Director General of the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service. He's a veteran in trade policy in the U.S. He's worked in that space as the U.S. trade representative. He's been in Geneva for them. He's worked in the private sector in between. And one thing you need to know is that his title is the longest in the US government. And I discovered this when I was going through my nomination hearings. And Senator Rockefeller said, "Do you know that that's the longest title in the US government? Because US and Foreign Commercial Service." So I went home and I told my wife, Purma, guess what? I didn't know that I'm going to have the longest title in the US government. And she said, "What's with that? It's the shorter titles that are more important." Secretary of Commerce, Vice President, President, not a long title. Nevertheless, a very important job. So Arun is going to share with us his perspectives on the US-India economic partnership. A few people who are better qualified to do that than he, and the place of technology from the vantage point of the US government. Ed Knight is also an India veteran now, as chair of the US-India Business Council. He has, and the US-India Business Council itself has a strong cohort of the most important technology companies in the US. Ed himself is executive vice chair of Nasdaq, which a lot of our companies would like to eventually go public on. MD Ranganath is chairman of Catamaran Ventures, a significant investment firm, very active in the field of venture capital. Ranga was formerly at Infosys, and he has a deep understanding of the technology landscape. Sandip Patel is the CEO of IBM India. He also leads IBM in the region, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, other countries. And he heads IBM's capability center in terms of serving global clients. So a good example of high technology located in India serving the globe. So before I turn over to Arun, I'll make a few quick observations. One is when we talk about partnership, and as Ranga pointed out to me earlier, we really got to look at it at multiple levels. There's government to government, there's private sector to private sector, there's educational institutions, research institutions. And our panelists today are well qualified to address all these very different dimensions of the partnership. The US-India Tech Partnership has many important actors, the leading US tech companies that are heavily invested in India. Sandip is a good example. And it's also important to realize that the reason they're investing in India today is not for cost advantages. They're really looking for talent advantages. So the game has changed from cost advantage by going to India to really tapping into the talent that exists here. And the numbers in terms of engineers that are in India that are doing world-class work are really quite incredible. Second, there's a growing deep tech ecosystem, a startup ecosystem that further strengthens the US-India connection. And we see potential from our firm, Celesta Capital, we see potential to create companies in India that will have global impact. And like us, there are other venture firms, and many of them are here today, that are engaged in a similar pursuit. India's deep tech startups are now being seen across many sectors: defense, space tech, agri-tech, and we are excited about the entrepreneurs and the companies that we have invested in those areas. A key element of this ecosystem is finance, from venture capital to companies going public. And so this ecosystem will be represented here by both Ranga and by Ed. Then the commitment of both countries to work together on the initiative on critical and emerging technologies is a very, very key development. And the resulting benefits from technologies like AI will drive advancements across the board in healthcare, in education, in strategic areas, and these can have worldwide impact. And finally, from a people-to-people perspective, as technology and business are essentially about people, one can see that no two countries are better aligned than the US and India. And this is exemplified by the rise of Indian Americans in academia, in corporations, and who bring a unique perspective to their understanding of the bilateral relationship and the potential of the bilateral relationship. So with that, those scene-setting comments, let me turn it over to Arun V. And while you can have your coffee.
Thank you so much, Arun. And I have to say, talk about big shoes to fill, not only because we have the same name, but Arun, when we worked together in the Obama administration, was such a friend, a mentor, and really helped me appreciate and want this job that I now have after him. And so I'm so grateful to Arun for his friendship and his mentorship at all times. Let me first say how thrilled I am to be here, not just to be back in India, but to be here for this particular event. Let me thank my friends at Celesta for pulling this together. It could not be more timely, and and I'll talk a little bit about why that's the case. But there's so much at this moment in history that this convening is going to really be remembered, as the ambassador says, for being at the right place at the right time with the right people. To all our friends from the Indian government and the Indian private sector, let me say first and foremost and deliver greetings on behalf of Commerce Secretary Raimondo, who just had the pleasure of participating in the Quad Investors Network Dialogue on Monday at the White House. And it really is great to be here among so many friends and luminaries. And Arun, of course, is an example of how that is not a mutually exclusive group. And it really is, I think, there's the right audience for us to have this conversation. I want to touch on a few areas where the US government, and particularly where I am at the Commerce Department, is really proud to be contributing to this deep tech transformation that is happening in India, and how that deep tech transformation, the US and India can lead the world going forward. In January, the White House opened up a whole new channel of partnership with India through the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies. And the goal of this initiative, ICET as we call it, is really to elevate and expand the US-India technology partnership, placing an emphasis on the key future-forward sectors of AI, quantum, next-gen telecommunications, semiconductor, space, and defense technologies. And at the Department of Commerce, which houses the US Patent and Trademark Office, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, the Bureau of Industry and Security, and my home, the International Trade Administration, we have long cultivated the legal, scientific, economic, and policy expertise to support an initiative such as the ICET. And when President Biden and Prime Minister Modi met in June, they welcomed and applauded our department's launch of an innovation handshake under our bilateral commercial dialogue, which aims to bring the two countries' innovation and entrepreneurship systems closer together. And when our leaders met again in September, they referenced the ambitious agenda that we have brought to bring US and Indian startup founders, funders, academics, and government together for a series of in-depth conversations that will focus on addressing specific regulatory hurdles to cooperation and promoting innovation and job growth, particularly in emerging technologies. Now, one thing I want to say whenever we describe the work that we do, oftentimes when you're in the private sector, you hear about the government, various governments establishing dialogues, and the natural instinct, of course, is to roll your eyes, because who the hell wants another dialogue where people just talk at each other all the time? But what I will tell you, and what I'm most proud of, is that under our Secretary's leadership, our dialogues are not about dialogues, they're about action. They're about producing results that are commercially meaningful. And that is why our partnership with all of you here is so important. Because if what we are doing in the government is not producing outcomes that matter to you, then we're all just wasting our time. So we greatly value the partnership that we have with all of you to keep us honest and to make sure that the work we are doing is actually relevant in the real world. Now, we have many platforms that we use to engage in this manner. I talked about our Innovation Handshake, which is an outgrowth of the US-India Commercial Dialogue, and that takes place annually at the ministerial level between the Commerce Secretary and the Indian Commerce Minister. Now, we're extremely fortunate that rare among our dialogues, we have, as part of our US-India engagement, an opportunity for our business leaders to meet and coordinate and push the governments through the US-India CEO Forum. And I know that some of you participate in that. And I want to emphasize that one of the most important aspects of this forum is the fact that we, both governments, count on this forum to push us. You all know how government is. I love government. Government can do so much, but we know that we need the push from the private sector sometimes to overcome our biggest challenges. And we're counting on the US-India CEO Forum to do that, and I know that they certainly are keen to do that. We are also partnering with India throughout the region through the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF. This is the cornerstone of the Biden-Harris administration's efforts to strengthen U.S. economic engagement in the Indo-Pacific region by working with allies and like-minded partners on economic priorities that we share. And in fact, as we sit here today, we have an ongoing negotiating round in KL with our 13 IPEF partners to really advance aggressively on a timeline to produce real results under the Indo-Pacific economic framework. But our partnership extends beyond just the bilateral, beyond just the regional. We are taking our partnership to a global level. We see this in many ways, but of course, this was witnessed most recently during India's hosting of the G20 summit. Under Prime Minister Modi's leadership, we were proud to have worked incredibly closely with India to develop toolkits on upskilling and on building trust in the digital economy. Now, as we look ahead, whether we're talking about the bilateral, the regional, or the global, our department is keen to leverage the U.S. private sector's key strengths, innovation and entrepreneurship, to tackle some of the most daunting challenges of our time. And as we bring the U.S. private sector to the table, we are equally passionate about partnering with our Indian friends to bring the Indian private sector to the table as well. Because we know that when the U.S. private sector and the Indian private sector get together, the possibilities are limitless. We are already working closely with our friends at the US IBC and my longtime friend and colleague, Atul Kashyap, to really conceptualize how to best implement this innovation handshake. And in the weeks ahead, you can count on it. We will be calling on many of you to help us support the upcoming innovation handshake engagements. Another key engagement early for next year in Silicon Valley will be a hackathon that aims to bring top talent and groundbreaking technologies together to help solve what the US and Indian governments will be identifying as specific global policy challenges we cannot tackle by ourselves. More than ever, we know that today's global policy challenges will not, cannot, and should not be presumed to be solved solely by governments. More than ever, we will be needing the private sector to develop the solutions. And that is why we do need your ideas, your energy, your networks, and your support for this effort. A key goal of mine for this visit to India is to build deeper connections with you all and with so many of our private sector friends throughout India and the broader ecosystem here to help us keep doing the right thing and help industry grow in both of our countries. Let me just close by saying that never before has there been a more urgent need for US-India global partnership. And more importantly, never before have the United States and India been so well positioned and poised to actually rise to meet that challenge. I am so proud of where this relationship is today. Like Arun and Atul and others, I've been working on the US-India relationship for so long, and this is the most exciting moment in our history. We are so ready to take off and lead the globe together, and counting on you, I'm sure that we'll be able to do that. Thank you all.
Thank you, Arun. Couldn't agree more with your comments. And let's kind of drill down into it a little bit. Maybe the first question I would have is, why is technology so important? And Ranga, you could lead off, and Sandip, you could follow, and then we could pick it up.
Great to be here, and congratulations to Celesta team for putting such a fantastic event. Before I just answer that question, as I was listening to the ambassador on the watershed moment, I couldn't help think about another watershed moment which happened just around 2000, which is what we call as Y2K moment. That has been a watershed moment. I couldn't help saying that, hey, how that transformed the Indian IT services collaboration between the United States and India, just from being a remote offshore center thousands of miles away to a very strategic co-creating and partnership model which has emerged today, quarter century later. I think when I look back at that, it was Y2K while it was just a trigger. I think a lot of things came together to make it happen. One, of course, the government policy itself. Luckily, that was the time when the United States started the H-1 policy to allow the Indian workers. Second, in India, there are a lot of tax incentives that were provided. And more importantly, the educational institutions in India scaled up from providing little less than 100,000 engineers to 1 million engineers in a rapid period of time. So I think a lot of things converged. And finally, it happened between enterprises, expanded to governments, expanded to individuals. Now, coming back to, I believe that we have that watershed moment around the corner for deep tech as well as manufacturing. Catamaran has been kind of very focused on both investing. We were so far riding on the back of the services wave. Now, we do believe that in addition, the deep tech and manufacturing from the investment point of view is very important. Coming back to your question, I think technology is pervasive, impacts ordinary citizens more than just the enterprises or the governments. If I were to reflect over the last 5 years, the transformation piece that technology brought in India and impacting the common person's quality of life is, I need not, again, repeat that. Imagine if COVID had happened in India just 5 years before, India would have come to standstill in many ways. And today, with 650 smartphone users, we did not feel that impact because technology was right there. And it helped in delivery of services, helped in delivery of healthcare, and the entire vaccination program in the country was driven through technology. So I think technology's impact need not be it's kind of very pervasive. And I do believe that for the first time, as Arun was mentioning, we have an opportunity of two open democracies with similar value systems, and also not just as offshoring center, but beyond as a collaborative co-creation partners to do that. I think here is that opportunity, and I'm quite excited that all the stars are aligned.
That's great.
So maybe if I, and agree with all of your points, Ranga, but I think when I look at technology, and if we just back up right around the pandemic, post that, I refer to now technology as something that we call Sutradhar in India, because it's sort of become the connector between societies, between citizens, between businesses, and all the rest. So in many respects, it's actually become an enabler, a business accelerator, and in some ways an equalizer that is actually helping us drive citizen services. So if you look at anything today, whether it is whatever we do with sustainable citizen empowerment or what we do with climate change, none of that is possible today without the use of technology. So clearly, the pace of technological evolution has exponentially gone up. But we need to keep aware of the new technologies that are coming up that will impact how we take care of citizens, how we drive businesses. But all of that in turn then creates a whole mode of employment generation. Because today, if you look, and we do a lot of work in skilling in India, one of the things that we find working with clients, with governments, and all of the above, unless people are skilled in the right forms of technology and can use technology to make it effective for business, it becomes very difficult, when you look at the new age workers that are coming through. So if technology is used right, it is used, as it's become pervasive, it can actually drive a lot of employment generation. And in many respects, given the demographic dividend that India has, it can truly become the skill capital of the world.
Technology, Nasdaq. So we're the home to $24 trillion in market capitalization, almost entirely of technology companies. $2 trillion of that has moved from the New York Stock Exchange to Nasdaq. Why? It's because companies consider themselves technology companies, and they want to be on the technology market. Today, in 2023, a railroad is not a railroad. It's the technology company. All companies are technology companies, I would argue, of any size. That is the point of competition. So if you're going to be innovative, if you're going to be a growing economy, you have to have technology companies. Technology is synonymous with jobs, in my view, and economic growth. And a lot of people come to NASDAQ and they say, okay, what's the secret? Give us the secret. Why don't you open a market in our country? And as much as we'd like people to believe we have the secret, we're but just one element of a very complex ecosystem that is necessary to create technology companies, innovation, and growth. Fortunately, that exists in the United States. It also exists here, and it doesn't exist everywhere in the world. Your legal system is often overlooked in thinking about technology and growth. You must have a stable, strong, predictable legal system. You have that here. You must have great educational institutions which spin off ideas and do research. We're lucky to have that. Your colleague from Stanford was at the center of it, but now it exists throughout the United States and also in India. And you also need well-functioning capital markets with the right rules that protect investors, but also, in our view, open capital markets that reflect the culture, your culture and values, but also that allow the flow of capital, or it's necessary to fund that innovation. But you have those elements here, and not only do you have it at a time of geopolitical stress in which the competition for the future and the ability to establish national security in your country and ours is somewhat dependent on how we deal with this competition in the technology area. And that's why it's so important to use our friendship and partnership to collaborate on AI, on cybersecurity, on all these challenging topics, to build our countries and protect our citizens, but also to secure our national security.
If I might just pivot onto the financial sector, since we were talking about that. If I just pivot to that topic, how can the financial sector, from venture capital to public markets, support the growth of the US-India tech sector?
Well, I think it is, I would argue it is today what the Secretary referred to, I said. I wish all of you could have been there in Washington in the first meeting with Secretary Raimundo, who, by the way, is just a tremendous public servant. We see it, though, throughout our government and yours, that is very focused on this relationship. But at the first ISET meeting, you had the National Security Advisor of the United States and of India, our Secretary of Commerce, representatives from your cabinet and Commerce Ministry, with business, collaborating and getting down to details about, okay, why is venture capital holding back, perhaps in India, if they are. I'm not saying they are. But if they are, what are the issues? In that area in particular, I think part of the issue always is you have to understand greed is a good part of this system. And if you're venture capital or private equity, you're looking how you're going to exit your investments. And the more options you have, the better. And that's why we're working with your government on different ways that the international global investor can get access to Indian companies and bring capital in here. But working through those issues. So how do we make it happen? It is frankly hard work. It's getting into the details of the tax system, the regulatory system in both countries. And that work is getting done, and we have public officials who are very, and I'm encouraged, very focused on dealing with those issues, like the Assistant Secretary here.
So Ranga, do you want to build on the technology and the financial aspect? Because I feel that there's a lot of great stuff happening. Certainly in the venture capital space that you're in and I'm in, there's a lot happening in funneling venture capital into extremely promising opportunities. So do you want to elaborate?
Sure. I think any strong collaboration has to really start grounds up, while tone at the top is very important. What I really mean by that is for example, in the venture capital in India, so far has been primarily focuses on Indian companies for Indian markets. I think we have seen a dramatic shift, or at least over the last 2 years. How do we fund Indian companies for global markets? And that has been a big shift. And there have been fantastic examples, whether it is Postman and Process Track and so on. I do believe that that transformation is silently happening. There is no more, hey, this is Indian capital for Indian markets. That mindset is going away. And most of the companies are also looking that way. The other fundamental shift that is happening, which is supporting this venture investment, is the risk-taking ability of the youngsters in the country. Now, I sit on the board of IIM Bangalore, top business school. At least when I graduated, most of us would go for jobs. Today, top 1/3 of the class is either joining a startup or starting a startup, which is, it also reflects the risk-taking ability of the families behind. So I think we have a situation where there's a good top-notch supply of entrepreneurs. Then again, the venture capital firms' willingness and ability to fund for their global aspirations rather than just local aspirations. I think that's where the venture capital industry, I do believe that over the next couple of years, we do that significant shift. And I will not be surprised where a lot of collaboration opportunities happen between Silicon Valley firms and Indian firms.
Arun, any points you want to weigh in on? Or?
Yeah, I think what I would say is, from the role of government, right? We are not in the business of directing finance to go. That is your job. Our job is to allow you to do that and create the conditions to let you maximize your choice, use your expertise and your intelligence to direct capital where capital should go and get the greatest return. And we need to facilitate that. And there are formal ways of doing that through setting up markets and governing markets and setting up the rules of the road. But there are also informal ways of signaling. And I think that's what you see today, post-pandemic, and you hear the president talk about this all the time. The reason some of these things that we do matter is not just because they deepen the relationship between our governments. They, in fact, are a signal to all of you and to all of our friends in the private sector that as we live in a world where trust does become more and more a criterion that is moving up the ranks of priority in making some of these decisions, this signaling serves to indicate where we see trust more likely to develop and where we don't. And so I think we're here to make sure that all of these students graduating, creating their startups, joining these startups, we want them all to succeed, not just in the United States, but also in India. We know when Indian startups succeed, that's good for the United States. And so I think we look for ways to support that both formally and informally.
So now there is one instrument of the US government that actually can be very powerful in lubricating the venture capital system in India, and that is the US Development Finance Corporation. And I would encourage them, especially when you're talking about the deep tech transformation of India, I would encourage them to take a very proactive role because this will pay huge dividends for both countries. So just a point I wanted to put in my mind. I want to make sure we have some time for audience participation. We have a couple more questions I'd like to chat about. But is Rudra here? Rudra Chaudhary? Yes, he is. Rudra, I'd love to hear your comments on this, and then anybody else who has comments. Can we get a mic to Rudra, please? Rudra heads the Carnegie Endowment think tank in India and is very, very expert on the areas we're talking about.
So Arun, when you said you'll call me out, you literally meant you'll call me out. So, okay. Look, I think this is all great. And I think ISET's one of the most powerful political frameworks that we have to deepen the tech and econ relationship. And we're seeing a lot of movement, on semiconductors. We're seeing huge movement. Micron's investment in India is, I think, no longer the exception. It'll become the rule. The kind of things that were done to get Micron to be able to break ground is quite unbelievable, actually. Similarly, on the US end, I know, pardon the pun, but a lot of China was broken with the GE HAL deal. the kind of things that were done on the export control side in Congress was just superb. And that's where the political framework of ISET, I think, plays a very important role. I guess I'll just leave people with two thoughts. One is that ISET's also shown that it's been a force function for deregulation in India, in our factor markets. So when you have a political framework that's as wide-ranging as ISET, and possibly more needs to be done on the biotech side, AI side, I would argue. But it's been a forcing function for India to think about factor market reforms, land, labor, capital, and state capital relations. And perhaps that's the kind of delta that we'll have to watch very carefully as we go ahead, is how much of a forcing function this will be to deregulate inside of India. And we've got real examples. Micron's a real example of that deregulation, for instance. And similarly on the US end, and your namesake is here, I think export controls is just going to be a continuous story, right? There's no silver bullet here. My own sense actually is there's a lot of misunderstanding on export controls, which is generally a complicated minefield. I think the strategic and trade dialogue that was kicked off by our foreign secretary and his counterpart in commerce in the US is one of the strongest frameworks, the kind of back end of what's going to make ISET deliver. And again, I said, my own sense is, in India, if you talk to anyone about export controls, they immediately come out and say, you need to renovate ITAR. That's just never going to happen. But there's a lot you could do below ITA, but I think there's a lot commerce can do on the US side, is to continue to invest in workshops, speaking to our startups, getting FAQs out. And there's something that on our end that we'll need to do. Because without this piece, you're going to hit a glass ceiling when it comes to space, quantum, AI, defense, and any of the areas that's going to require genuine kind of tech conversions and a tech surge, if you like, between the two sides. Thanks.
No, thank you, Rudra.
Just to respond,
yes.
I think two things I would say. One, I think we totally hear you on the strategic trade dialogue. The value of the private sector as an input, it cannot be overstated. I think whenever we impose any of these kinds of controls, it is always critical to understand the real-world implications of any of these kinds of policies that we adopt. And that's why we do try to have such robust private sector input and engagement, because you want to make sure that you do what you need to do to protect security, but you also don't overreach in ways that kind of prevent the types of commercial engagements that you want to actually have happen. So that private sector input is key to getting that balance right. Your point about deregulation is well taken on the ISET. What I would say to go beyond that is there's that deregulatory aspect of it, but there's also a value of ISET in helping us be forward-looking and thinking about smart regulation. And what I mean by that is the whole notion of ISET is there's a whole range of technologies that ISET covers that exist already. Artificial intelligence, not new, been around forever, new developments, but that's already in play, and we need to think about how to regulate that in a smart way. There's a number of technologies that we are only now beginning to even understand, that you all understand much better than certainly those of us in government, but we have to think about if, when, where, and how to regulate in those areas. And so I think ISET gives us the venue to help us think jointly about how we might want to regulate one day as these technologies are developed, commercialized, and deployed.
Great. Other comments or questions? Maybe I'll have one more topic for our panel here, and that has to do with AI. Will AI trigger a step change in the importance of technology? Like, Y2K, as you said, was a watershed moment. The World Wide Web coming right after that was another watershed moment. And the US-India technology connection grew in both. Is AI going to be the next? And how should we be approaching this? And maybe Sandip and Ranga, and then Lance.
I've been at Nasdaq for 25 years. I've seen a lot of technological change. AI is not hype. It is changing every technology company that we deal with. To quantify it, people we listen to tell us, in general, it could improve productivity by 30% across the board. Will it cause distortions? Probably. Does it have the possibility of curing diseases? Yes. And making all of us more productive, yes, but it is not hype. It is a competition globally, and it's happening right now. This is not happening next year. This is happening right now, and it's changing everything.
And IBM with Watson has been a pioneer in this space, so what's your view?
And actually we've just launched Watson X, which is the next evolution of it, where we're trying to bring AI to data versus the other way around. But look, I mean, I think it is truly transformational. Productivity, automation, that's a given. But I think there were two things that Ambassador Garcetti said, which really struck a chord. Number one, he talked about augmented intelligence. And it truly is augmented. I mean, we keep talking about the hype of artificial intelligence. But if we just look at the proliferation of data that is being created around us, which we now have the ability to read, and all of that, much of that data is temporal. It loses relevance within a few nanoseconds after it's created. So the ability to capture that and drive it for better decision making, that I think is the true power of AI, which will make, I think, everyone smarter decision makers and much more informed in terms of, you know, saving lives or citizen services and all the rest of it. So that's one part of it. The second thing he talked about was making it from hype to reality. So this notion, I mean, there's a lot of hype around it. You know, people talk about writing, journalists are worried about, you know, ChatGPT writing articles for them and all the rest of it. But if you put all that hype aside, I think truly using AI for business and for citizen services, for true applications where you can actually drive productivity, much, much greater productivity, make it a lot more automated in terms of how we live and how we operate, but more importantly, drive much more informed and better decision making in terms of how we operate. I think that's the power of AI. And you're right, it's here and now. It was probably here a few years ago, but now we are actually starting to scale it up.
No, absolutely. I think both Sandip and I have emphasized the part of the productivity. No, we do believe that we have a thesis saying that it is an amplifier of individuals' capabilities, as an amplifier of individuals' capabilities. Finally, I think the way we see, at least personally I see, is that AI is not just about enterprise productivity, it is about improving the quality of life. Whether it is better healthcare, high quality education service, high quality financial services. I think interestingly, as Sandip mentioned, you know, one study said, look, 70% of anything that is done in the world, whether it's enterprises or government, 70% is transactional processes, repeatable activities. 30% requires judgment and decision-making abilities. I think AI, slowly but surely, is going to transform that 70%. And that's where I think there is a lot of collaboration that is possible between the US universities, Indian universities, and more importantly, the private enterprise. I think that's what we are excited about and we are betting on.
Right. And I think to close off, since we are at the end of our time, the Department of Commerce has been a leader in thinking about AI and frameworks to guide AI. So maybe Arun, you could talk about that and then we end the session.
Sure. I think, you know, from the United States perspective, you will find no country on the planet more of a tech optimist than the United States for obvious reasons. And so I think we fully share all of this enthusiasm about the potential for AI that we're still just learning. I mean, it is happening so quickly. It's hard to keep up with the potential, the promise of AI. There are downsides. You know, I think we're not naive. We don't have our heads in the sand. We know there are downsides, but we always tend to view the glass as half full, if not 3/4 full, because we do believe that yes, you have to address the downsides, but you always have to do so with keeping an eye on maintaining that innovation, because it's that innovation that holds the solutions for the future in all of these areas that we're talking about. And I think what we're always focused on to get that line right is how do you cultivate trust in terms of the design, development, use, and governance of AI. And because it's only when you cultivate that trust that we can make sure that we are maximizing the promise of AI and minimizing the downsides. One of the ways that we've been doing that is through our National Institute of Standards and Technologies, where we have actually developed an AI risk management framework that develops and applies a risk-based approach to assessing AI. And this is designed to ensure that AI is used in the most effective but also least harmful way possible. We're also pulling together working groups of academics and private sector and experts around different areas to give us insight, because getting this line right requires the input from all of you and all of folks that are expert in this, because it is changing every day. And as you know, as government, by definition, we are always going to be behind industry on this. We need to make sure that while we're behind, we're as least behind as possible, and again, can still put in place principles and rules to help you maximize the upsides of AI. And we're very proud that we're able to do that through our NIST efforts.
Thank you, Arun. So great conversations, really a public-private conversation, as you mentioned, the private sector and the public sector talking together. And I just want to sum up once again by saying that we're all very, very optimistic about this technology synergies between the US and India. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.